Today we're going to be talking about the gospel. The gospel is key. And I want to tell you a story, one that paints a picture of a gospel, the good news. Because sometimes understanding the gospel becomes easier when you can see it, when you understand it, when you can live it, and when you're living it. And here's the story. There was once a very rich and a very loving father. He had children he adored, and the father built a massive luxury mansion. Let's say 2 floors. Everything was perfect. The father lived upstairs, and he gave the entire downstairs to his children because he wanted to be in close proximity with his children. He handed them the keys and he said, "Live downstairs, enjoy. Everything you need is here. And from upstairs, I will supply everything you need. Water, food, protection, fun, everything." The kids didn't have to worry. They didn't have to work to survive. All they had to do was just live and just enjoy and just be merry. Enjoy the father's love. And the father loved being close enough that he would come downstairs to hang out with his children, of course. And that brought the father joy, seeing that he could enjoy living and seeing his children love him, just so that he could spend time with them. But here's the thing, far outside the mansion, there were trespassers. There were people who were jealous and angry. They were outside. They desperately wanted to break in. They wanted access into the mansion. They got so jealous, but they couldn't break in because this mansion was highly secured. And they knew the only way was to convince the children to open the door. And the trespassers, they knew this. So one day they lured the oldest child, and they managed to convince the oldest child. They said, "Look, listen, there's more to life outside this mansion than in this mansion. Your father is only doing this because he wants to control you." The oldest child, son or daughter, believed this lie, and then went and convinced his other siblings or her other siblings, saying, "Look, I think there's more to life outside than in this mansion. And Dad only wants us to do this because he's really trying to control us." Now, they all believed and bought the lie, and out of their own free will, they let the trespassers in. They handed the keys to the trespassers. So the trespassers came downstairs and they occupied the downstairs of the house. Now, the moment they entered the house, they took over the key and everything changed downstairs. They stormed in, they took over the house, and they established new laws downstairs. Now, if I was to ask you guys a question, how do you think the house now looked with the trespassers in? There was chaos, there was crime, there was destruction, there was sickness, and there was all evil. Evil had entered into the house downstairs through the trespassers. The children who were the rightful owners of the house now became slaves, and they now had to live according to these new laws, the new laws that the trespassers had established. And the new laws the trespassers established was, the new laws that were now established was that if you break any law or commit any crime, the penalty is always death. One crime leads to death. One crime leads to death. The father upstairs watched this when it happened with sadness, but he also respected their free will because he loved them from the start, that he gave them free will, because with love there's free will. But yet, as a responsible father, he had to do something. He felt responsible because he's the father. The father felt responsible, just as a father should. And so he said, okay, as a father who's responsible and loving, I'm going to honor the laws, the new laws that are operating downstairs. And so he did the unthinkable. He decided to come downstairs, but he came downstairs under the same law as his children. He came downstairs as a slave. So he came downstairs as a slave, and he was fully aware of the penalty for breaking any law. And he knew the penalty for breaking any law was death. But guess what? He lived perfectly. He broke no law. But he accepted the penalty of death on behalf of all his children. And he did this so that none of his children would ever have to die under the law. So essentially, he came and he was punished up unto death so that his children would be free. And by dying under the law, he broke the power of the law. He defeated the trespassers. He took back the keys and he restored dominion. And he handed it back to his children. Now the children are free again. They are now sons and they're no longer slaves, because the trespassers legally don't have a right to punish them or to sentence them to death, because the price has been paid. The father has died in place of his kids, and they can no longer be punished for any sin that they commit. Right? So now they are owners, no longer victims. But here's a twist. Many of them still live like slaves. Even though the trespassers no longer have authority over them, they still live like slaves. Now, some of the children know that they are free and they are sons, but some don't know. And now that is the gospel. That is the gospel. The gospel, and that is the gospel, because the reality of the house is that the kids who know that they now have dominion and they're no longer slaves have to go and tell the other kids who don't know. They have to go out and spread the gospel. Now, let's mirror this down to the reality. I mean, I've told you the story, but let me tell you the reality. The reality is that in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, upstairs and downstairs, right? The earth was designed for man, and God gave man dominion. He said, let us have dominion, which is the keys. Man's work was simple. He said, enjoy freely in Eden, which means pleasure. But humanity handed the keys to Satan. So God came himself in human form as Jesus, born under the law, took on sin and died under the law to set us free. And he restored what humanity, Adam and Eve, lost in the garden. He restored dominion. He restored sonship. He restored authority. And now that is the good news. That is the gospel. The good news is, and still is, that many people, although many people still walk in bondage today, the good news is that we are free. We are free. We are free. And that is why the gospel is good news. You are no longer a slave. You are no longer an outsider. You're a son and you're a daughter. Free. In the Bible, it says in the book of Galatians 4:4-5, it says, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons. In John 8:35, it says, a slave does not remain in the house forever, but a son remains forever. We are no longer slaves, we are sons. Ephesians 2:19 says, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens, members of the household of God. Galatians 5:1 says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm and do not let yourselves be burdened ever again by a yoke of slavery. The mission, Jesus said, is to go into all the nations and preach the gospel, preach the good news. So as you go, preach what? The good news. And what is the good news? That you are no longer a slave. You are free. You have ownership. You have dominion. You have sonship or daughtership of earth. Jesus says, behold, I give you authority. I give you authority to open the eyes, to to open eyes, to kick out those trespassers in your house, authority to tell other sons and daughters that the keys are now in our hands, that we have dominion. And this is the gospel. This is why we go. This is why we speak. This is why we preach. This is why we now have dominion over earth. And God wants his children to know this. God wants you to know this. God wants me to know this. God wants everyone to know this. Thank you so much for joining me today. And hopefully next time I'll have Tojimi and Tonimi. For me, it's 70 times 7. God bless you all. Bye.